My name is Sylvain Rochon, and I am the Paradise Engineer. And this week, what I'd like to talk about is echo chambers. I'd like to talk about how information is filtered and how we perceive the world through those filters. And the reason why I'm doing this is I do want to talk about the future. Where are we heading with this? Because everything is always in transition. But to better survive or live in the present, and we need to understand what we're talking about and what's actually going on. How does it compare with where we were before? Because that's how we used to perceive the world. And where are we heading? Like, where is this going? What's this transition that's ongoing? Where is it leading us? Or where should we go? Because we still have some work to do in how to transform what is now towards what is more desirable in the near future. So to explain this, I figured let's do some infographics. I want to kind of illustrate this. So I did a couple of some images. I'm going to share my screen just like I did the last time. So here, this is kind of an illustration of how we used to consume information, right? Like, we are the population at the bottom, and there were very few sources of information. I'm talking here pre-internet, right? So 20 years ago, a little bit before, a little more than 20 years ago. So the generation before cell phones were everywhere with video and all that stuff, and before the internet was very widespreadly used, and where you have all sorts of alternative ways to consume information. Like back then, basically you had a television, you got newspapers or other print materials, and you had people around you, so friends, families, and of course co-workers. And generally speaking, because the friends and family had the same access as everybody else regarding television and newspapers and other like magazines and periodicals, most people had access to generally the same information. There was just like a few sources of information, and they tended to be somewhat in agreement, although back in the day, we still had a lot of fringe publications and niche publications of all sorts. But there were not that many. And there was nobody kind of in between managing how the information was going to be consumed, or which magazines or newspapers that were accessible. Because basically on television, everything was programmed. So you had X number of channels. Everybody could flip a channel and see what everybody else would be seeing. So everybody had access to the same information. And silos of information would be created with people that had special interests around, let's say, hunting, for example, or whatever it was, and they would seek out specific niche materials in magazines and books and TV shows that would satisfy their need. But they would have to seek it out and seek groups that had those same interests. In the meantime, they would still be exposed to everything else in the world that everybody would be able to see. What everybody was flipping through channels would see the news at 6 o'clock, for example, on multiple channels. So it was there was a wide exposure to a wide array of informations of different opinions constantly. So generally speaking, everybody had access to similar information, and then they went to their special interests and so on and so forth. Nowadays, what we're looking at is something that's more like this, where we have huge amounts of different sources of information, texting, streaming, SNS, other apps, search engines, static video channels like YouTube and Vimeo. You still have your friends and family and coworkers are still around you, but you have a lot of information on many, many different sources of info. And cable TV is going out. Like, most people don't use programmed material. It's all on demand. And between us and the on-demand systems, there's always an artificial intelligence filter of some form. And I even put friends and family behind that filter just to illustrate how they are exposed to the same kind of filter as you are. So you're because it doesn't apply to family as much, but friends and family, the friends, sorry, would be selected based on your filters. So the people that have the same kind of siloed interest as we have more tendency to select them from that, because of what's coming, what I'm explaining a bit next. So the IA filter, where does that come from? Well, it's something that emerged because companies want to compete, and they want to, as consumers, we want a more targeted consumption. So we want to see what we want to see. I know it's redundant, but now if I'm interested in hunting, then I want to see hunting stuff. If I'm interested in buying sportswear, most of the time, because I'm an avid shopper and I do a lot of jogging, then I want to see that. So the companies have developed technologies, that these AI filters, that allow them to target us with what we want to see based on our patterns, our data, and so on. So you end up through that filter, instead of everybody receiving the same information, or at least visibly have access to the same information and the same people, it's all behind this curation service, this AI filter, that allows us to consume as individuals exactly what we want to see, not what everybody else sees. So the part of the world, or the perception of the world, information from the world that we see, is a small subset of what the world is about. It's only about what we are interested in, right? And everybody else will have a slightly different perception of the world, because they are different, their interests are different. So the curation is adapted to them, and families, and, well, not family, of course, but friends, friends get met or gather inside those silos, sometimes online, sometimes physically, and you meet new friends within those areas of interest that are already kind of curated, because you're interested in X, and these friends are also interested in X, and you kind of meet on Facebook, or through gatherings organized by Meetup and whatever, and then you end up to engaging with friends that are receiving the same information as you are, basically, or very similar. So you end up with a world where information is extremely segmented and customized to the individual. But it does cause, at this moment, it does cause an effect where you got these silos that already existed out of just interest, but now they are even more siloed, because the people inside those silos of interest, those special interests, receive information and opinions that are related that are interesting to them and the people inside the silo, but very little information from outside of it. So that's why we call those echo chambers, because you have these individuals now, because we don't consume newspapers anymore, we don't do program TV shows anymore, we just consume things that are of interest to us, that are curated for us. So if I am, for example, a liberal in my political point of view, or my kind of lifestyle, or progressive, or whatever it is, right? It could be, you can imagine whatever. Well, the information that will be fed to me on my Twitter, my Facebook, YouTube, recommendations from Netflix, and all that stuff, right? These are all AI filters that will try to give me what I want to see. So I'm going to see things that cater to my liberal views, to my tastes, my progressive tastes. Like, I'm going to see a lot of sci-fi stuff in my case, because I'm always talking and thinking about the future. I'm going to see a lot of progressive stuff. I'm going to see a lot of innovative ideas. I'm seeing a lot of stuff about UBI, because I talk a lot about it, and I search, and I do some information gathering. So I'm provided with lots of articles on that topic. That's my world and my example. Somebody else that has a completely more conservative point of view would not receive any of that, or would receive the same information but from a negative standpoint if they are themselves against some of these concepts. And their friends, whoever they meet from online sources and some of these filters, will have the same opinions. So each one of us starts to, or have already started to get a feeling that our opinion and our friends' opinions that were met through these arenas are the prevailing thoughts. They are popular. They are important. And everybody else, when you meet somebody that is outside that silo, that echo chamber, expressing with very high confidence their own opinion, which may be completely different than ours, we find that bonkers. Because we kind of think automatically that, oh, there's everybody around me, online and offline, agree with what I think is best. And the information I receive, and it's all coherent in my silo, and they're talking about something very different, and they think the same thing. They think, man, this person is backwards. This person is thinking about completely different. So we're thinking about the same thing about each other. It's like, they are wrong and I'm right, because I got all these people that back me up and all this information that back my opinions up. And this is all because of this AI filter, which is not a malicious thing. It's set up in place by companies that want to give us what we want, because what we want is to receive information that we like. We want to receive information that agrees with us. It makes us feel good that others and companies and opinions agree with what we agree with, what we think. And so we end up in those, again, echo chamber. That's why it's called an echo chamber. You know, you say something out loud and it's said back at you. So this reinforces your opinion. So instead of having a broad range of opinions exposed to us, and we get influenced by a lot of different opinions, and we get into discussions with different people with different opinions, and we are exposed to different articles, and it kind of like, you have to keep an open mind in that environment. Instead of seeing that, we just get reinforced in our own opinions, unless we make an express effort to seek out other opinions and other channels, because the AI will always try to cater to what you're thinking and what groups you belong to, because it tries to sell to you, right? These all come from companies that are trying to sell. Google search presents you ads and search results that fall in line with what you've been searching in your history and what you've done before and what it sees visible about your personal information. And it does that because companies that are paying to be placed in ads and otherwise up in the search results, they want a high result. If you click on it, they want the person that will desire that. So if you do a search on Google, on your computer, it has to be your computer because that's where the data is collected, for anything at all. You could just put a keyword in there that is of interest or not. You're going to have a certain number of search results. If a friend of yours that has a completely different lifestyle, opinion, whatever, or a family member uses the same keywords on their browser, same browser, Google search, they'll get different results than you do, because Google tries to tailor the search for something that person is going to buy into, something that is going to fall into that person's silo and echo chamber. So we all live in these echo chambers, and we don't live in a single echo chamber. We often live in many because we're all kind of different and varied. But we live in these echo chambers where we advertise to each other and we all agree with each other. It's all kind of nice. And then we go into the real world, into your business or discussion with somebody else. You go into a panel discussion or whatever it is, and you confront it with somebody that has an entirely different set of echo chambers. You get frustrated. How come this person doesn't have the same opinion? I'm right, and I got all these people that are right around me. What's wrong with this person? They're saying the same to you. They're thinking the same, because the perception of our world is what we perceive through our senses. What goes into our brain is based on what we are exposed to. If we're only exposed to the same opinions that we agree with, we have the impression that the world is in agreement with me, or the majority is in agreement with me. So there's no surprise that movements that make no sense at all, like the flat earth movement, right? People that believe that the earth is in fact flat. And there's an international conspiracy in making us believe that the planet is a sphere. That group has been growing. Why? It's not because the earth is in fact flat, and because that would be the argument they would make. Our numbers are growing because we're right, because they're inside that echo chamber. For some reason, they've believed, or they had doubt about that. They encountered that group, that ideology, because filters are providing them with that information, because they know who you are. They're providing you with what you want to see with your own belief. They're kind of mirroring your belief, or they're trying to automatically. And then they found there's a bunch of people that believe the same thing. It reinforces that belief. They belong, and now they start arguing. Others look into this and they say, well, there's a bunch of people that believe this. Maybe it's true. It's not. It's physically impossible for any astral body anywhere in the universe to be anything else than a sphere. Okay, just put that out in your mind. Okay, don't go and search that. Well, if for fun, for sure. But the point is, it's been growing because of the siloing echo chamber effect, not because it's more true. Same with the anti-vaccination movement and a bunch of others. It's people that have doubt about it. They search and they find huge amounts of people within those silos that have the same belief, and they reinforce their own ideas and they convince themselves. Even though at the source of both of these ideas, anti-vax and the flat Earth movement, there is an individual that provided a fairly convincing video, I guess would be the right word, to less educated individuals. That seems to kind of to illustrate their point of view, and then that they're right. So a lot of people can latch onto that, even though these theories are debunked by way more people that have way more reputation. There's all this conspiracy theorizing going on. So you got a lot of people that kind of follow conspiracy theories because of that. Lots of varied conspiracy theories, because you end up in a silo. If you have doubt, you go into the silo. There's huge amounts of people inside that silo. And then you get fed with all this information constantly because you started searching that and you started seeing that in the SNS. And you think, well, more and more information is coming out from that. It's going to leak. It's going to become a big thing. It's the truth. No, it's something that's happening to you. At first, you did a little search out of curiosity. You were not bombarded with any of that because that wasn't your profile by the AI. You started searching for it. Now the AI starts feeding it. And then the more you click on them, the more you reinforce your own idea, but the more the AI thinks that you want more. So it's providing you more. And you have the impression, because you're on the receiving end, that there's just more information of it. Another example of this phenomenon is the idea that the world is becoming more violent. And I see this all the time, and this is very, very common and very misleading because violence is very broad as a concept. But this is kind of the same thing, but without the AI filter. I'll explain. Just the concept of the abundance of media, right? So you got a bunch of people that may not be as used to the abundance, like they come from my generation or older, right? I'm 45, just to give you an idea, where there was very little information and there was limited reporting that was happening. Over the years, there's always been an increase in the amount of access of information because more technologies, more channels on the television, appearance of internet, and so on. So there's more data available that are describing a bigger quantity of different things happening around the world, right? Just because we have more access in general to information. And because there's more of that, then we're more exposed to violent acts through news and all that stuff. So it gives us the impression that there is in fact more violence, because we, in our own perception, we count, just giving numbers, maybe in one given week, we are counting like 100 different acts of violence we hear from all over the world. Whereas the year before, maybe we would hear about 80. Maybe the year before it was 50. If you look at the actual statistics of violence and war and all these terrible things that we know are bad, it's always been on the decrease since forever. Every year there's fewer acts of violence around the world. Every single year. The curve is very deliberate. It goes down. There's some kind of humps at different periods in different areas because of different, in the States and Canada, you're looking at like, I think it's the 80s and 90s, there was more violent, more homicide, because there was this kind of flow in North America where this happened, and then it went back down. But if you do that analysis, you ended up with a constant downward regression line. Okay, so it always generally goes down if you take like a rolling average of significant length. So the point is like our perceptions deceive us and make us think things are happening a certain way or opinions are changing in a certain way when they are not. So how do we get ourselves out of this, and how do we move into the future knowing this? Well, first, please realize that there will always be more information available, because have more sensors, more people with phones. AI is getting smarter. Like maybe AI is going to start reporting things without a person or a journalist or anything taking videos, and it's going to go into the web and it becomes available. So we're probably going to see even more moving forward acts of violence, more information, more niche stuff, more information available in general of all types. That's just going to keep increasing. In the meantime, violence, just like it has always been, should keep decreasing. But our perception may kind of analyze things like on a subconscious level. Well, there's more violence. So that's the first thing. So be careful of the quantity of information. How do you protect yourselves against that? Well, look at the actual data. So don't believe your senses. Okay, just look at actual measurements and data and numbers from reliable sources, right? And look at what the data says, like this X amount of mass murders, X amount of blah, 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 whatever, right? And you can see it goes down. So that's the real information, because what we're exposed to, again, can fool us. And the second part is the AI filter part. Know that as we move forward into the future, AI and companies and us, because we want this, information will be more and more tailored and more precisely tailored through even more means and more directly to what we want to see. So we'll be even more into silos than we usually have, than we have been so far. That's driven by our desire to be productive and efficient, and to not be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to see popular opinions that contradict ours. We don't want to see that. So AI is going to try not to show us that. It's going to try to show us what will make us happy and buy and follow, because that's the behavior of a capitalistic system. The system wants to sell to us, and we want to be comfortable. So we want to be surrounded with people and opinions that mimic our own. And the AI will provide us exactly that. So be aware of that. And despite the amount of information that's going to be available everywhere, and it's going to be massive as we move forward, exponential amounts of information, what we'll see is information that will make us feel comfortable that we are right, and our ideas are straight and narrow, and we don't need to change a thing. If you're progressive, you're going to see like information that makes you believe that everything is moving along and progressing nicely. If you're conservative, the opposite end of the spectrum, you're going to see like that everything's stable, and there's some attempts to kind of disturb this, but it's thwarted by XYZ. These are opinions that are fed from the same amount of information. How do you get out of that? Well, you got to expose yourself to other pieces of information. You got to look, just like the example with the amount of information and violence. You got to look at the data yourself. Don't trust. You got to understand what the filters are trying to do, and it's fine. Most of the time, in my case, like I'm very aware of all these things. I'm in my silo, perfectly happy because I'm kind of in my leisure time. I'm just enjoying my entertainment and the information that's provided to me. But as a professional futurist, what I'm trying to do is I want to see the clear picture of what the world is really about. So I'm going out of my way to look at different channels that are opposite in opinion. And I look at core data and I make my own analysis. It takes a lot more effort. Most people won't do that. But it gives me a clear view of what the world really is. And also teaches the AI in parallel, which is non-intentional on my part, but good, that I am looking at other things. So it does provide me on occasion with alternative opinions, not just my own. And that's great. What would really help this, because almost everybody would not do what I do, like actively look at other resources that are a different opinion. We need to have also AI, or because it won't be people managed, it has to be computerized, so algorithms or AI or whatever, right? Ideally, some kind of deep learning algorithm like an AI that inside our sources of information would tell us what is the likelihood of this to be factually true, for example. Because you can have opinions, and opinions galore, that's fine. But what about the data inside? Is the data accurate? Because I don't want the AI to tell me to give me an opinion. I want AI to give me real information, the real data. I'll make my own opinion about what's really happening, and that's fine. But if Facebook, for example, I'm picking on Facebook a bit, would on each post would kind of rate it like, this is 95%. The facts here are 95% accurate. Then I could get the opinion of whoever or whatever that is, but I would know that there's a very high probability of the data actually being true, the actual information being accurate. And then you'd have like the 10% and 5% accurate or 0% accuracy, which I would just laugh at and have fun with. But it would have to be a decentralized, unbiased AI. Otherwise, maybe I'm being fed things and the percentage itself is actually biased as well. So it's a big challenge. And some social media giants have already started doing a bit of I would call it a censorship of sorts. We've seen this in the States on Twitter and on Facebook, both, where because there's such bad misinformation around the COVID virus, some posts that related to the virus studies, information like wearing masks and stuff like that, have been either removed according to policy because they would be misleading, causing harm, or some other reason according to the the SNS policy, or they were kept on, but a notice was added. And YouTube does things like this as well, saying, this is possibly from a bad source, or this is possibly like a misinformation. Well, that gives a clue to the readers, like, okay, maybe this isn't, it's still information, it's still data, it's still, interesting perhaps, or entertaining, but it raises a doubt, and then you can always research and make your own mind anyway. So these are probably initial little bits. And like the example of Facebook, I've seen this a few times where underneath a certain channel or certain videos, you'd have little notices, little notes that were added not by the channel itself, but by YouTube itself, saying, like I know RT, the news channel, it says, well, this channel is either partially or fully funded by the Russian government, which is something I knew, but it's written down there. And it's meant as a caution. It doesn't say it's good or bad. It just says this is where it's from. For Aljazeera, it says, well, it's this news channel is funded by the Qatari government. There's nothing inherently wrong with the Qatari government either. But it informs the person that where does this information come from? Because Al Jazeera, the people are the anchors there are British. So they speak this British language, and there's obvious other clues that it is Middle Eastern, because the name Al Jazeera is not British. But it helps people determine for themselves whether or not they should trust what they're seeing, or whether or not or at least it gives context on what they're seeing. Because we need more information, interestingly, for us to make our own mind about whether or not we're being fooled by ourselves, by our own desire to have customized information provided to us. So that's really important. Like you've seen, all of you, how misinformation is dividing us, and how we become kind of animals a little bit with each other when we find a different opinion. And we've all been frustrated, like how can anyone believe this, for example, whatever this could be. But think that whoever is having that opinion or seeing the world in that way, they're saying the same about you. It's not any different. Who's right and who's wrong is very hard to determine on the surface. You have to dig deep. You have to look at the data. And the data usually usually determines, quite quickly what is probably happening. But there's no exact way to distribute that kind of knowledge to a large population. People want to feel good. And so that's why they live in those channels. And that's why the AI kind of the AI works to sell to these people, because the people want to feel comfortable. That's the demand in the market. They want to feel comfortable. They want to feel smart. They want to feel like they know something that nobody else does, and they understand the world in a unique way that and others are kind of pointless or clueless. It makes them feel good to have that special information. You can think about the QAnon phenomenon, for example, mostly in the States. It's the same kind of concept. If you look at research, if you calculate and you do some data analysis and probabilities of whatever QAnon posts is true, if you do that dispassionately, it's bonkers. There's no basis of truth in any of it. However, it's popular enough, and there's enough distrust in government, and there's enough vitriol between parties and so on, that people want to believe this is true because they like the fantasy of it. And then with a certain amount of people comes a sort of prestige on the conspiracy. As if there's X amount of people that believe in it, it must be true. So you have that that confirmation bias, right, in numbers. And we want it to be true if you're a believer in that. So we get caught up in these conspiracies or these ideas that have no basis, because we don't go out and rationally look out for the real information, look at the sources and do the analysis. Most of us are not trained to do that. I am, but I have 3 university degrees, and 2 of them are data analysis type degrees, like science and engineering. So yeah, like I instinctively do that because I've been trained to, but that's a small portion of the population. And most people don't find it fun, like I do, to look at, to seek out sources of information. So we have to live within this world of silos and echo chambers. And we have to moving towards the future, we have to ask for other tools to give us more information that would help us determine fact and fiction, good sources versus bad sources. And those must be from unbiased sources, and people are biased. Therefore, ideally, it would come from some artificial intelligence that would be built in, either forced in by regulation. Some nations may force that, some implementation of some sort. It could be a claimed unbiased AI on private platforms, which could be trusted or not. But we're moving into that space. There's just going to be more information as we go along. It's not going to be less. And as we move through, we're going to be wiser, and the world is going to get better, even though our perceptions may tell us otherwise. But we're going to get through this. One thing that would definitely help a lot is if we move away from our current economy to the new economy, which is something I've published several videos recently, especially even one last week about how a new economy would work, that doesn't push offer and demand pressures for survival, like work to survive, consume, like consumption being kind of pushed onto us. Mostly because companies need to make profitability, because employees need their salaries. It's a whole chain of events that ends up being toxic over time, over a person's life. I mean, and we are victims of it as consumers, always exposed and advertised to within our channel, because we want to have what's inside our silos and to feel comfortable. It's a vicious circle. But we'll see the world change. Hopefully this has been informative to you, and you will seek different silos, look at different opinions, look yourself using your own energy and time at what else is out there. If you're talking about the news, to give you a tip, what I do, I usually use snippets. So I use Twitter. But Twitter is very siloed because you're following a certain amount of people. So you can follow multiple different opinions, right? And that gives you a breath. If you I use YouTube a lot for news. I am subscribed to Fox, MSNBC, CBC here in Canada, CNN, Aljazeera, RT, and I should subscribe to the BBC, but I've never gotten around to it. Well, I got so many already. And it gives me kind of a fairly broad stroke of news and different variations of the same news items from different opinions. And it helps, because then my silo is not so confined. It's kind of wider. So I'm encouraging you to do some of the same. And if you have some talent or at least interest in looking at sources, use the scientific method, right? Stand back from the opinions. Ignore the opinions of whoever's talking. Like, you want to make your own opinion, and look at where the information comes from and whether the source is reliable. And what I mean by reliable is the people that are putting up the information don't have any motivation to mislead. Typically, public servants have their motivation is to keep their job. Just not to fail at their job. So in most countries, public servants do their job correctly. And if their job is to report data, like the labor ministries, for example, like what they put labor data up, their job is to put accurate data. They have no motivation to do anything else than that because they want to keep their job. That's it. That's pretty reliable data. If you get your data from an anonymous writer on some obscure blog somewhere that exposes something really interesting, that's not very reliable because it's some unknown person's opinion that claims to have and that claims numbers that you can't verify anywhere else. Not reliable. Just don't believe it. unless it's corroborated by a reliable source. These are little tips for you. So, and again, if I just want to give you another example before we go, you can go to usually people that are used to data, like scientists or engineers. Not all of them, just because you are one doesn't mean you are reliable, but that are in a position within their employment that where they have no advantage of having an opinion one side or another. So scientific research is not always reliable in that way. But if a group publishes a result in some kind of research about something amazing, and then the same results is duplicated a dozen times in different countries by different groups that have entirely different motivational structure, that starts becoming real, right? Because one group maybe wants to become famous because of their result, but that only applies to the first group that make the discovery. The others are just trying to see, like, is that right? Like, let's try that ourselves and see, because that would change things. And they're trying out because they want to see if their theories are crap, and his is good, and they want to progress maybe further based on solid grounds to do more research that would be valuable. So they want the information to be correct, but it needs to be correct. So they'll validate or invalidate the first person's claims, and if it's validated several times or over many groups and many years usually, then it becomes kind of a scientific theory or principle, and because it's repeated by many groups, different motivations, and it becomes kind of a constant. It becomes a trusted data. Okay, so these are principles. It's always about motivation, right? Why don't we believe politicians whenever they say something? Because they're motivated to try to convince you that they're good for you, and they'll claim whatever they want sometimes. And I fact check a lot of politicians and what they say, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, because I check people that don't have that kind of political motivation: researchers, public servants, people that have no motivation to do anything weird with the numbers. They publish them because it's their job to crunch data and just put it on the website. They just do it, and then if it's right, then I'll tend to believe that. Most politicians, I saw statistics. This is a while ago, but there was I think that was American. They were ranking politicians by fact checking what is the percentage of facts that they got wrong or they misled or whatever. And it's hardly ever any politician over any period of time is over 50%. And I'm sure a lot of the times they're misleading, not because they're intentionally misleading. For a normal politician, I mean, some of them are intentionally misleading all the time, depending on where you are. But they just get the facts wrong because they're not analysts usually. They're kind of public speakers trying to convince people. So they kind of like use bad data or bad information or data that may be outdated. They confuse the numbers sometimes. Sometimes it's kind of like honest mistakes. Sometimes it's very intentional, or it's just stupidity. But it's not a high percentage because their motivation is not to be accurate. It's not part of their motivation is to be convincing. So motivation for politicians regarding accuracy is not very high. It's not high at all. Anyway, hope this was useful. Enjoy. Try to change your habits regarding information. Don't take anybody's opinion for granted or given. Make your own from core source data from a reliable, unbiased person that put it up there, or validated by many groups with different biases all over, and you get something good. All right, bye bye for now.